On the morning following Alec's departure, I was of a mind to summon Sergey for a good talking to. He'd been away all of yesterday and had only just returned. He came into my study looking unsuitably cheerful for a man in mourning. "Sergey, about these trips you have been making to the village." That was all the opening he needed. The whole dismal story came bubbling out of him. He'd met a girl, fuming with impatience. I was barely able to tolerate listening to his drivel about her. My reaction was, to put it kindly, cool. In addition to the ludicrousness of Von Zarovich coupling himself with a peasant, I was compelled to point out that he was the next most high priest. But no word from me would change his mind or move his heart. He was blind and deaf to everything but her, and to the devil with his responsibilities. We did not part on amicable terms. Less than a week later, Sergey brought her up by carriage from the village. She had no family, having been one of the orphans raised by the local church. I was just considering that her lack of a family was probably fortunate when Sergey escorted her up the steps to present her. Then, all my disparaging thoughts fell away. She was, without doubt, the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. "Strahd, this is Tatiana." The girl made a low curtsy. She wore the simple homespun costume of Barovia, but she wore it like royalty, and her copper-colored hair like a crown. "Welcome," I whispered. She raised her face to me, the clear skin, the great eyes, brighter than gems, and full dark lips made all other women seem ugly by comparison. There was no comparison. She was unique. She was perfect. I felt my heart soar at the sheer joy of looking at her. I took one of her hands and lightly kissed her fingertips. "Welcome to Castle Ravenloft, Tatiana. Look upon this as your true home forevermore." Her returning smile was like that first glimpse of sun after a bitter winter. And then she looked at Sergey. It was as if the sun that had favored me had all along been hidden by a cloud. Its brilliant glory now shone in full upon him, and him alone. Custom demanded I tell Sergey of my plan to take Tatiana for a short walk before supper. Oh, he was for it, of course. I called at her room and took her to the south courtyard. Perhaps she was bracing herself for some horrible question-and-answer session from me. Once outside, I did make inquiries about the comfort of her quarters and the ability of the clothes she'd found there. She changed for the evening, wearing a copper-colored gown of flattering lines. "Everything is wonderful, old one," said Tatiana. This form of address was perfectly proper for her to use with me, considering our social stations and, unhappily, the difference in our ages. "I am very glad to hear it. If there is anything else you need or want, you have but to ask. This castle and all who dwell here are your most humble servants, myself included." This comment seemed to make her somewhat more disconcerted. "Is something wrong?" "Oh, no, nothing at all. Only that I think you are the kindest one of all to speak to me so. I've seen some of the beauty you've made here. There is much warmth in you, or you could not have made such things." I laughed a little. "I think your tribute would be better directed to the artisans than to me." She smiled at me. Oh, gods, how she smiled. "Now I also see why Sergey loves you so." My good humor faded with the mention of my brother. "You love him, then?" "Oh, more than anything I've known, imagined, or could ever imagine. I hope you don't think it's wrong of me to love him so much." "No, not at all." She had just put into words that which I felt for her myself. I turned away so she could not see my face. Along with the sharp joy of love, I was being cut in two by utter hopelessness, and I was unable to keep it from showing. I faced her and kissed her hand once more, my heart booming. What to say? How to say it? For me to speak now would only confuse and frighten her, and spoil any chance of making her forget Sergey and turn to me. Sergey. No. And I blotted that malignant thought out before it could complete itself. Elder? A sweet voice brought me back from that abyss. Are you well? Of course I am, I lied. Sergey. I shook myself. Time to go in, don't you think? Twelfth moon, 3:50. That first night, the following day, and all the others afterward, each revealed a new delight in Tatiana and inflicted fresh agony upon my heart. Each drove home the fact that she was not interested in me. The idea that I was, in her eyes at least, too old to be considered a lover was foremost in my mind, though looking in the mirror made me doubt it. My body was as lean and tough as ever. But this innocent girl seemed unaware of me in the way I desired. She called me only elder or old one to show her respect for me, and all the years I'd lived daily proof that my doubt was hopeful self-deception. By subtle acts, I did try to play the suitor. I gifted Tatiana with jewels and fine clothes, commissioned her portrait. Though she accepted all with deep appreciation, it was clear she saw me only as brother and not rival against Sergey. As winter made outside activities less attractive, I spent more time in the study, going through my books. One would think the ritual of casting a love spell would be common, but my books were bereft of such things, except for a single short treatise concluding that love was a force that could not be reproduced by magical methods. I tore the page out and tossed it into the fire. Burning books for warmth, my lord? My dagger was out even as I pivoted to face the speaker. It was Alec Willem, leaning against the doorway. "Announce yourself next time," I said with no small irritation. "An assassin wouldn't. I just wanted to see if you could still guard your back." I resheathed the dagger. "What is it? Another ball versi after me?" Alec ran down the list he kept in his head of all the households he'd visited, ostensibly as my ambassador. "So, the Marcus clan can be trusted to stand with me as long as the Darovnias remain loyal," I said an hour or more later. "And the Darovnias will remain loyal as long as Lady Ilonia supports your rule," Alec added. "But the others? You picked up no clue on the Deliznias?" He shook his head. "Reinhold's belly still enslaves him. I sneak off with young Leo and raid the pantry and the wine cellar. And did Leo confess anything interesting once you got him drunk?" Alec smiled. "The young dog was doing his best to get me drunk so that I might talk." "Did you learn anything useful?" "That he's very smart and highly interested in the affairs of Barovia. He had many questions about your political plans and how the Deliznias will figure in them." "Nothing unusual in that, or particularly secret?" "No, but I don't think he shared any of this with Reinhold." "Indeed. One wonders what he's up to then. Is it for himself, or for someone else that he is so curious? He struck me as being rather easily led, which leaves the Wachters and the Bookvolds as possible influencers. He was very close to Ilya, don't forget. And cut his throat without hesitation, don't forget. In your defense, he pointed out. At the time, I'd had a fleeting hope that the need to watch my back so closely had passed with Ilya's death. Alas, no. Never for a man in my position. Alec's information on the Wachter and Bookvold families was just as inconclusive. Well, I'd have a chance to judge things for myself soon enough. "My brother is getting married this summer," I said. "I'd heard some news of it on my way up. It's to be a large wedding. Be there when the guests arrive and have your eyes and ears open for anything interesting. Have you enough people to cover them all?" "I should. Haven't had a chance to check on things." "Then go. Do so while you can." "May I take this to mean I have additional goodwill visits ahead of me?" "Yes, you may." He sighed and shook his head, but voiced no real objection. I knew that, discomforts aside, he preferred being out over being tied to his castle duties. I've turned up 5 new volumes for your book collection. It cost more than a few coppers, I can tell you. There's not much change left in that purse you gave me. My eyes snapped up. If they have true spells of the art in them, it doesn't matter. Alec had standing orders to buy any books concerned with magic for me. I'm sure they do. I couldn't read a single word. My heart began to beat faster. Sounds most promising. Where did you get them? From the private library of some minor noble. He was selling off his grandfather's estate to pay for his wine. Let's hope you get a more constructive use from them than he. Indeed, yes, I murmured. 6th moon, 3:51. The sun was well down and my rooms dark and close, despite the tall open windows. Stepping onto the courtyard overlook, I peered up into the night sky but saw no sign of threatening clouds. All was quiet within the keep. I could just make out the guards on the western wall. Theirs was a soft enough job. Castle Ravenloft was nearly impregnable. Alec was of the opinion that the only way it could be taken was from within. He'd returned from his latest Ambassadorial tour several days ago, making sure all was running smoothly for the wedding. He was still not happy about the many guests that had come the last week. For all his searching and sniffing, he'd not turned up anything suspicious. I was satisfied that if anyone was actively plotting, Alec was there to block the plans. I returned to the study and lighted some candles. The books Alec had brought back 6 moons ago had proven to be uncommonly advanced. Most of the lore in them was quite incomprehensible, and that which I did understand was dark. But the spells themselves were fascinating and frustrating. During this time, I experimented relentlessly on the most simple and met with failure again and again. As for the more complex spells, I was unable to even translate their titles. The language was outside my magical vocabulary. The candles burned low and began to gutter. Another night was slipping away from me. My last night. My last chance to have her. Blackness surged up and clouded my brain. Another part of my growing despair, gnawing at my soul like a starved monster. It was a long, suppressed hatred towards Sergey, toward the life I was trapped in, toward life itself. Shuddering, I pushed it back. Time was short. I could waste none of it. I bent over my book and tried to draw sense from it once again. 2 of the candles went out, casting the page in darkness, just as some of the words were becoming clear. Impatiently, I grabbed up the book to take it to better light. The words, suddenly crystalline, jumped out at me. A spell for obtaining the heart's desire. This was the one I needed, had searched so long to find. Oh, my heart raced from the possibilities. I looked at the list of ingredients. Bat's wool, ground unicorn horn. Yes, I had those. The candle flames flickered again. A curl of smoke drifted into my eyes. I blinked them clear and resumed reading. Bat's wool, ground manticore spike. Oh, that wasn't right. I started over. Rat's skin, ground manticore spike. On the 4th reading, I saw it was useless. The spell's protection was too strong. The last candles danced, flickered, and went out. I was in total darkness. Heart's desire. More like heart's breaking. Oh, it was hopeless. The answer to all my problems was in my hands, but I was utterly unable to use it. I might have to study for years before... Hopeless. 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 Oh, that was too much to bear. I slammed the useless thing down with all my strength. That's a very old book. You should handle it more carefully. The voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere, took me cold. I dropped to a fighting crouch, dagger in hand. Who's there? I thought it might have been Alec's voice. You ought to know. Tatiana's voice now. Yet, not her. It was behind, no, in front of me. You called me, she continued. The sound moving first one way, then another. I heard your hate. I'm here to give you your heart's desire. Stand still. My tone was rather harsh. Tatiana, show yourself. Sergey laughed, in such a way as he'd never laughed before. You could not tolerate the sight. It was then I knew this to be an illusion, born of magic? The laughter grew, filling the rooms, filling my head. I clapped my hands over my ears, dropping the dagger. I was dealing with something far beyond my experience and needed no teacher to tell me it was deadly. Yet it wouldn't have come without some type of summoning on my part. Strahd, Ilona now, whispering, "You called me. Don't you want your heart's desire?" "Don't you want your heart's desire?" Tatiana sweetly echoed. "Or will you let her go to your brother?" asked Sergey. "Will you let me go to your brother?" Tatiana questioned mournfully. Gods, it knew exactly what to say to me. "Will you let her go?" Alec demanded. "No. She will be mine," I whispered in my mind. They heard me and laughed. "What will you do to get her?" Alec again. I refrained from answering, but it accurately picked up on the question in my mind. What might be required from me in turn? "Nothing beyond your means or skills, Strahd." I would have sworn it was Alec's voice, but for the contempt I heard now. "Shall we begin?" I gestured vaguely toward the table, wanting more time to think. "But right, I've nothing beyond your means or skill," said Tatiana, in a tone that only an expert courtesan could use. I felt her hand, or something like her hand, caress my face. I even smelled her scent on it. "Nothing beyond your means or skill," Sergey sneered, and the hand slipped down to close upon my throat. It was much larger now, and smelled of battle sweat and blood. I grabbed for the hand. It was gone, as if it had never been. "What are you?" The voices merged and separated around, above, through me. They took on weight with no substance and pressed upon me. My heart pounded, labored. I cried out. The voices laughed at my pain, and in that sound they seemed to assume a single, huge shape. I was in total darkness. The shape was darker. I knew it now. I knew what it was. We were old friends. Death was in the room with me. Death stirred around me like an ocean's tide. I fought to drag in one more breath. Death washed over and receded. For the moment. "Have you come for me? If so, then take me and be damned." Nothing. I waited for many terrible, slow heartbeats. Then, "I have come on your behalf," it answered, using all the voices at once. This was some last trick, a final taunt before dragging me into the abyss. "You have fed me well," it continued. Gods, but wasn't that true? All those years in the war, how many had I killed? "You are due your reward." Yes, I thought bitterly. Another death for death. What other fate was there for a blood-steeped warrior? "Your reward, Strahd Von Zarovich," it emphasized. Reward? Then the voices assumed a secretive tone. "You hunger for your brother's betrothed, for your lost youth. I shall remove the rival from your path, and you shall age not one day more." Sergey gone. Time removed as an adversary. Tatiana turning to me as I dreamed. My heart's desire. It must be a lie. Had to be. Could death lie? If you do as I tell you. There it was. The parley, the bargaining, the trade. What could death possibly want from me? "Nothing beyond your means or skill," Tatiana said clearly. The iron bands around my chest eased. I sucked in air, gasping, coughing. It had pulled back, but was not gone. It was waiting for my answer. I had no way of knowing for how long. Not long. It waited. Silent. 1 minute. 2. I wiped sweat from my brow. My skin was colder than stone. It waited. Then began to draw back. I felt it going. going with my only chance, my last chance. Tatiana, going. What must I do? I whispered. It stopped, turned, and laughed. My fingers were shaking, but I lighted a fresh candle, then used it to light others. The study looked the same as before. It was gone, but I sensed, or imagined, it hovering close by like someone listening from the next room. With the restored light, what I'd just been through should have faded like a dream, but it had happened, and I had listened to the thing with a fearful eagerness. Some of its instructions made no sense, but oftentimes, in magic, one must perform rituals with no discernible purpose. This was dark magic. I was on the threshold of true necromancy, yet oddly calm, as though I would reap the benefits and someone else would pay the price. There would be a price. No bargain was without one. But I knew I'd be able to pay it and cover for it. A bluff here, a lie there. It was hardly different from statecraft. But the benefits. Not to age one day more was one thing, but to have Tatiana. She was worth any price. She was springtime and summer rain, autumn color and winter stillness. And, by tomorrow night, she would be mine. The harsh scrape of metal on stone jolted me from my dream of love, very close. From the bedchamber. No, just beyond it. I glimpsed a man's shape moving away from the open window. One of my swords hung on the wall. It was in my hand, and I was through a window in a few short seconds. He turned to look at me. Alec Willem. His own sword was out, and probably the source of the noise. My lord, forgive me, but I came to tell you... I strode close to him, my blade held ready. What? He flinched, afraid. He knew. He'd heard everything. And he would talk, as though someone else guided my arm. I made a fast cut to his head. Just as fast, he parried and dropped back a pace. No, Strahd, do not another cut, another parry. Strahd! His mouth moved, but the wind carried off his words. I struck again. Alec retreated. Don't do this. I lost the rest of what he said, but took his meaning. He did not want to fight me, no matter. Neither of us had a choice. That's what I told myself anyway. On my next attack, he parried, then countered full force. This was no practice match. Lightning flashed, instantly followed by thunder. The battle fever was taking me over. With savage joy, I embraced its heat. Alec recognized it in me, then gave in to it himself. He pushed me back, and when we were clear, a parrying dagger was in his other hand. More lightning. Fat drops of rain increased to a deluge. Water clawed at my sight. I barely got my blade up in time to block an attack launched when I blinked. He used the advantage, doing a quick lunge and twist, trying to take the sword from my hand. I went with the motion, but my arm was pushed wide, and Alec seized his one opportunity and drove in with his dagger. I didn't feel it, not at first. Nothing until the next flash of lightning revealed the abrupt stain of red on my white shirt. The pain shot through me like a sudden, unquenchable fire. He broke off, staring, perhaps in shock. He'd struck down his lord. The man he was oath-bound to protect. The man who'd betrayed him, who was repaying all his years of loyalty with death, and was receiving death in return. No! But no denial would heal it. This was a bad wound. It was also my last. I knew the signs. I was going to die. As Alec hesitated, I made one more strike. My blade found solid flesh and bit hard. He cried out once and dropped his dagger to clutch at his belly. I yanked the blade free. It fell from my nerveless fingers. He let go of his weapon and sank forward onto the walk. I couldn't breathe very well. Somehow, I'd lost my feet and now lay curled on my side. Do you want to live, Strahd? Not Alec. But it sounded like him. Don't you want to live? Asked Tatiana. Live, Sergey. Live, Ilona. Yes, damn you! It laughed in all its voices. You know what to do. And so help me, I did. My legs were gone, but I could use my arms to crawl. I was more than halfway to death, but Alec lay between us, and in him was my last hope. His breathing was shallow. Blood welled up in his mouth. It spilled from one corner. His near hand clutched at me. Traitor. In the camp. A reproach to me. Now, there's he. What did he mean? Sleep. His grip on me relaxed, and he drifted off. He was nearly gone. What did he... There was no time to waste on his mutterings. I found his dagger and dragged the edge firmly across his throat. Blood. The whole fountain of it. Life, if I dared to take it. As my own life ebbed, I didn't dare not take it. I drank deeply and lived again. The rain washed away all trace of evidence. I stood up, threw back my head, letting the rain plaster my hair from my face. Oh, it was glorious. My death wound was gone. Alec Willem, my only true friend, was dead by my hand, but I was unable to regret that death. The first part of my pact was sealed. I felt different. Wasn't the least bit fatigued, or quite the opposite. I felt young again. Leaving Alec, I rushed back through the windows and peered at my image in the bedroom mirror. I looked the same. Oh, disappointing, until I recall the voice's promise that I would not age one more day. Well, I was still very much in my prime. I could tell I was very pale, even ill-looking, though I felt better than I had in years. Oh, the sickly effect would probably pass. There were other things to think about anyway. With little effort, I pulled Alec's body inside and bundled it into the closet, making sure the doors were locked. Later, I would think up some story to account for his death. Avid anticipation of what was to come left me too agitated to feel anything but suppressed excitement. In a few more hours, Tatiana would be mine. I awoke, sluggish and stiff, very late the following morning. The sun was out, and there was entirely too much of it for me. I kept to my rooms, as enervated now as I'd been energized the night before. Only in the late afternoon did I begin to feel like my own self, and was able to tolerate a few necessary visitors. Reinhold de Lisnia, Victor Watka, Ivan Buchwald, and all of my former staff officers took turns trooping in to pay their respects. Wives and children were brought in and introduced. At least Reinhold understood me enough to leave his family at home. Rubbing his fretful belly, he looked like he would have preferred to have been with them. His brother Leo was no longer in the keep, he told me. The young man had fallen ill and asked permission to leave, which I found rather curious. Lady Ilona was present to deal with infirmities. Very odd. It could have something to do with Ivan's presence. Leo might not have been comfortable around the brother of the man he'd killed. Forgive me, but I came to tell you I uneasily wondered what it was that Alec had not been able to say, why he had come secretly to me. Perhaps later I'd figure it out. The restlessness was beginning to return to my mind, preventing me from concentrating. My initial fatigue wore off as the sun began to sink behind the mountain. Guests having gone down to the chapel, I dismissed the servants and saw to my own dressing. When I unlocked the closet doors, a shock went through me. Alec's body was gone. Far, and yet not far enough, I heard the laughter of familiar voices. His was one of them. Oh, he must have been part of my payment, a portion of the bargain. I tried to shake the voice from my head, wondering what else I might have overlooked at the time. Time. There was none to spare. I shrugged the problem off and got dressed for the wedding. White silk shirt, red neckcloth, stark black trousers and coat, and the Von Zarovich ruby on my breast. From the massive strong box, that had held the ruby, I also withdrew a small bundle of fabric and tucked it into my coat. But I still felt the cold, dark magic pulsing from it, as though it lay right against my bare flesh. Sergey was done up in his gaudiest uniform. In his chambers, he greeted me with a broad smile and an embrace. "Oh, I wish you had someone like Tatiana," he enthused at me. "Oh, but I will." I took out the bundle of fabric. "For the groom, I have a present," I said, handing it to him. "It's magical and quite old, well suited to the day." Sergey's constant smile faltered when the red, black, and gold hilt seemed to leap from the trappings. He went still, gaping at the thing. "I see that you recognize it," I said. "The time-honored weapon of a Balversi assassin. The sheath is made from human skin, usually from the weapon's first victim. The carvings on the hilt are runes of power." All Sergey could do was stare with blank shock. One should never store a blade in its sheath, lest tarnish or rust set in, but as I removed it now, the blade was as perfect as ever. The runes had their share of preservation magic as well as evil power. "Legend has it that it is bad luck to draw such a dagger unless you can give it blood," I went on. Sergey's lips parted, but plainly he could not think of anything to say. The Balversi. Deception was their greatest weapon. Your oldest friend, your most faithful servant, by the gods, even the mother who bore you could be a Balversi. Even your own brother. I smiled warmly. I'm generally not superstitious, but I think this time it's better not to tempt fate. Don't you agree? Moving more swiftly than thought, I struck, driving the short blade up into his heart. For what seemed a long time, he met my hot joy with a look of hurt astonishment. Then, slowly doubled over silently, falling into my arms. I eased his inert weight to the floor and worked the knife free. Drink of the blood, first from the instrument, and then of the chalice. Thus ran my instructions. After last night's business with Alec, this draught was nothing for me. I licked every drop of blood from the dagger, tried it, and left it on the floor. Then I opened up Sergey's uniform and put my lips to the wound and drank. Alec's blood had been taken out of fevered necessity. Sergey's was the fulfillment of appetite. It renewed my energy and spirit, and I felt strength such as I had never known before, tearing through my veins like heat lightning. Free! One more thing to do, though. A bluff here, a lie there, a blatant misdirection. I swept up Sergey's body and then let it fall with a bone-jarring thump. His eyes were still open, the same blue as our mother's. Free! I knelt and closed them. "You were supposed to have been a priest," I whispered. "Why didn't you just do what you've been born to do?" The thudding commotion I had just made drew attention, and Sergey's personal servant came through the door. I threw myself over my brother's body, as though overcome with grief. I looked up and imparted the bad news to him. Then he departed to summon help. Easy. Very, very easy. I tasted the blood on my lips and felt the stab of sudden worry. What had the man seen? Mirror. There was one just over there. Sergey had been preening before it when I'd come in. Yes, there was blood on my mouth, my face. Oh, bad. But if I cleaned it off, anything the man said could be discounted. A bluff here, a lie there. There was a basin of water on the table now. I scrubbed my face, cleaned my bloody hands, dried off, then checked in the mirror. Clean. No need to fear. I was so pale. Paper white, whiter. My very image was fading as I watched. My last sight of myself was of a man utterly consumed by surprise, utterly ludicrous. Myself, Strahd Von Zarovich. faded, fading, gone. 6th moon, 3:51. My Lord Strahd? Gone. My lord. The reflection only. I ran my hand against the mirror's surface and left behind finger streaks. Lord Strahd. I turned toward the intrusive voice. Tatra stood just outside the door with several of his men. They were looking quite grim as they stared from Sergey's body to me. Where's Captain Gwillem? I asked in a shaken tone. No one has seen him today, my lord. Then find him. He's in charge of security. I want to know how he managed to let a Balverzi into the keep. I pointed at the knife where it lay near Sergey's body. Tatra and the others recognized it and made the protective sign against evil. I dropped back a step, feeling ill for a moment. But, my lord, isn't that the knife? Tatra caught my glare and chose not to finish. You think there's only one blade for the whole filthy guild? The one I took from Ilya Bukvold is still locked away. I looked up, as though pouncing on a new thought. Find Ivan Bukvold. Tatra was a smart man. As I'd hoped, he made the connection between Ilya's death and Sergey's. A brother for a brother. His face set, he snapped a go-ahead to two of the men, and they obediently slipped away. The familiar act of giving orders got me to thinking again. There was much to do yet. With any luck, I'd be able to find someone unable to account for himself during the time of Sergey's death. Ivan Bukvold would be ideal. Alone, once more, I glanced at the mirror. Empty. What have I done to myself? Perhaps I've given up my soul for Tatiana after all. And then I heard her voice raised in a cry of disbelief and despair. It cut right through me. Someone's told her. Yes, she would have to go through the fire as well, but in time she'd realize her love for Sergey had been a child's infatuation. In time, I'd make her completely forget him. But for now, I made my way to the chapel. At the chapel doors, I was told that Tatiana had run outside into the garden. I was thankful for that, instinctively knowing that I'd not have been able to go into that holy place. The dark magic was upon me. I'd changed, but it was worth it. She awaited me. Oh, soon. The day's warm air had turned chill, and mist was beginning to rise from the damp earth like restless spirits of the dead. Oh, such thought was fancy only, but I did sense something else stirring all around me. Magic. Necromancy. I'd done more this night than kill my brother and drink his blood. More had happened to me than had been promised. That business with the mirror was yet another price for me to pay. Had I been less eager to take what had been promised, I could have gotten an answer. Too late now. I slowly approached Tatiana. The candlelight within the chapel was more than sufficient to overflow the stained glass windows. Tatiana was huddled in a pool of color from one of them. I looked down at her. Oh, if I'd had to kill a dozen brothers, drink a river of their blood to have her, I would have done so. Kneeling next to her, I put out my arms. I knew the totality of joy as she at last sank into my embrace. My strength, my love, all that I had was hers to draw upon. Why, Strahd? She whispered. It's happening. This was the first time she'd ever used my given name. Why? How could this have happened? Who? She clung to me more tightly. Her sobs were such as to break her in two. I cannot say, I murmured. Whoever did it will pay. Has paid. I promise you. Above her weeping, I heard the winds within me rise, trying to draw me away from the bliss of holding her. I put my back to them, shutting my eyes against them and the thickening mist. Tatiana. I took her head in both my hands and looked into her eyes. Ravaged as she was by her emotions, she was still perfect. Tatiana, Sergey is dead. You must accept it. But I accept it. Her great eyes clouded, but I felt a link forming between us. She would be mine. He is gone, but I am here for you. You will turn to me and know my love. She blinked, her brows coming together in puzzlement. Strahd? Yes. Now her hand came up. It was the same caress I'd felt last night in my study. Only this was the fulfillment of the promise made. Heart's desire. Oh, yes. By the gods, yes. Her eyes cleared, and awareness flooded them. Strahd. This time she said my name the way one lover speaks to another. I'm here. I shall always be here for you. Hearts. Now I raised her to her feet, her face tilted up to meet mine. As in countless dreams, my lips closed softly over hers. Desire. She returned my kiss. Hearts. Her arms went around my neck, and her body pressed close, breasts and hips against me. Hunger. We broke off at the same time, she to stare at me with all new feelings, and I in near pain for the swift beating of my heart. But along with the ecstasy of holding her, having her, I sensed the intrusion of other alien forces around us.